We're not stopping a $1 million pool deck because of 2 rusty stakes in the dirt.
The HOA bulldozed 2-century-old survey monuments so they could push their pool deck 11 feet onto my land. 48 hours later, their $1.2 million expansion was frozen. What Cynthia did not know was that I had the recorded survey, her certified warning, and a state property law that could turn roughly $75,000 in damages into $225,000. If you like watching bullies lose to paperwork and the law, subscribe. Because once we opened the contractor's email file, the survey markers became the least expensive mistake she had made. 3 days before the bulldozer showed up, I noticed the first problem. It was not dramatic. It was an orange construction stake. I had spent 34 years working around civil surveys, road layouts, drainage plans, utility corridors, and property boundaries. You learn to notice small things, especially when they are 11 feet out of place. The HOA pool complex sat along the eastern edge of my property. Their board had approved a $1.2 million renovation. New decking, 4 cabanas, an outdoor kitchen, a wider seating area, landscape walls, new lighting. None of that concerned me. Their property was theirs. Mine was mine. The problem was the new construction line. I measured from the existing fence to the first stake, then the second, then the third. Every one of them was inside my parcel. At the deepest point, the layout extended 10 feet, 11 inches past the recorded boundary. I checked it twice. Then I went inside and pulled the survey from my fireproof cabinet. My family had owned that ground for more than a century. The original parcel had been larger, but pieces had been sold over the years for roads and development. What remained was just under 14 acres, including the narrow strip beside the HOA pool. That boundary had been surveyed more than once. An old stone monument near the northern corner had been referenced in historic records. 2 iron markers farther south had been confirmed in later survey work. They were not decorative stakes. They were not random pieces of metal. They were physical references tied to the legal description of the property. At 9:17 the next morning, I walked over to the construction site. Cynthia Bell, the HOA president, was standing beside the project manager. She had a clipboard under one arm and architectural drawings spread across a folding table. I pointed at the nearest orange stake. That layout crosses my property line. She barely looked at it. The plans were approved by the HOA. I am not talking about your approval. I am talking about the boundary. She finally looked at me. Then she glanced at the old iron marker about 6 feet behind her. That rusty thing? Yes. She gave the project manager a short smile. We are not redesigning a $1 million project because of an old piece of metal. I did not argue. I took out my phone. I photographed the layout stakes. The iron monument. The old stone reference. The excavation equipment. Then I asked the project manager one question. Have you seen the recorded survey? He had not. Cynthia answered for him. We have everything we need. That was the moment I stopped treating it like a measuring error. I went home, made 3 copies of the survey, pulled the recorded plat, and started writing a certified notice. Because once they received that notice, nobody would be able to say they had not been warned. By 11:40 that morning, I had reduced the dispute to 4 pages. Page 1 was the current survey. Page 2 was the recorded plat. Page 3 contained the legal description of my parcel. Page 4 was a notice stating, in plain language, that the proposed pool expansion crossed onto private property by approximately 11 feet. I attached photographs of the existing boundary references. Then I sent the same packet 3 ways. Email, certified mail, and hand delivery to the construction superintendent. I wanted a clean record of who received what and when. At 1:18 in the afternoon, the superintendent called me. His name was Mark Ellison. He had been in commercial construction for 22 years. Unlike Cynthia, he understood what a recorded survey meant. "I have got your packet," he said. "I am going to stop work along that side until we verify the line." "That is all I am asking." He paused. "The president is not going to like it. That does not change the coordinates." At 2:06, Cynthia called. She skipped hello. "You do not have authority to stop an HOA project." "I did not stop your project. You told our contractor to shut down. I showed your contractor a recorded boundary. The board approved these plans 6 months ago. A board vote does not move a property line." She went quiet for 2 seconds. Then her tone changed. Calmer, more deliberate. "This improvement benefits 137 homeowners. I am not allowing one neighboring property owner to interfere with it. I am not interfering with anything on your land. It is 11 feet. Yes, you have 14 acres, just under 14. And you are willing to delay a $1.2 million community project over 11 feet you do not even use?" That sentence told me exactly how she saw the situation. To Cynthia, ownership became negotiable if the owner had enough land to spare. I looked out my kitchen window toward the old stone marker. "My acreage is not the issue," I said. "Your boundary is." At 4:31 in the afternoon, the certified mail tracking showed delivery to the HOA office. At 5:12, Mark forwarded me a short message. He had emailed Cynthia and the board attorney asking for written direction before his crew resumed grading near the disputed line. One sentence stood out. "Existing monuments appear consistent with the owner's recorded survey. Recommend no disturbance until boundary is verified." I saved the email, printed 2 copies, and added it to the file. The next morning, the excavator was running again. That was when I knew Cynthia had not misunderstood the warning. She had made a decision. At 8:26 that morning, I heard the excavator before I saw it. The machine was working along the eastern edge of my property, not near the disputed line. On it. I walked down the gravel path with my phone already recording. The first orange flag was gone. Then the second. Then I saw the stone monument. It had been pushed out of position and was lying on its side in loose dirt. One of the iron markers was missing completely. The second was bent nearly flat. And the excavator operator was scraping another layer of soil toward the pool. I checked the time. 8:29 in the morning. Cynthia was standing beside the temporary construction fence. White hard hat, clipboard, coffee in one hand. She saw me and did not look surprised. "Morning, Jack." I kept recording. "Where are the monuments?" She glanced toward the dirt pile. "The crew cleared the area." "You removed recorded survey markers. We removed construction obstructions." I looked at Mark. "Did you receive my survey yesterday?" "Yes." "Did you recommend stopping work along this line?" He hesitated. "Yes." Cynthia stepped between us. The board's attorney reviewed the situation. "Did your attorney move the property line?" Her jaw tightened. "No." Then nothing changed. She tapped the clipboard against her leg. "Jack, we are not putting a $1.2 million project on hold because you found some old stakes in the dirt." I pointed to the bent iron pin. "That one was photographed yesterday." She shrugged. "Then you have your picture." That was useful. I did not answer. I photographed the bent pin from 4 angles, then the stone monument, the excavator tracks, the bucket marks, the fresh grading extending 10 feet 11 inches into my parcel. I photographed the machine number, the contractor logo, the foreman's truck, and Cynthia standing beside the work. At 8:41, I found the missing iron pin. It was mixed into a pile of soil and broken concrete near the pool fence. I did not move it. I placed a tape measure beside it and photographed exactly where it had landed. Cynthia watched me. "You finished?" "For now." She smiled. She thought I had surrendered. She thought I was taking pictures because I was angry and did not know what else to do. What she did not know was that after 34 years around civil projects, I had learned one rule that mattered more than arguing. Never interrupt someone while they are creating evidence. I went back to my house and opened the file. Date, time, condition before work, condition after work, equipment present, witnesses, prior notice confirmed. Then I made one phone call, not to the police, not to Cynthia, to an independent licensed surveyor. By noon, he was standing in the dirt with a total station, looking at the hole where one of the old markers had been. After 10 minutes, he lowered the instrument. This was not an ambiguous line. Then he looked toward the pool. They crossed it. The surveyor's name was Daniel Ross. He had been licensed for 27 years. I did not tell him what conclusion I wanted. I gave him the recorded plat, the legal description, access to the property, and nothing else. Then I stepped back. By 1:40 that afternoon, Daniel had located 2 independent reference points outside the construction zone. From those, he reconstructed the boundary. The result was nearly identical to the survey I already had. At the deepest point, the HOA grading extended 10 feet, 10 3/4 inches onto my parcel. Close enough to 11 feet that no competent contractor could call it a rounding error. Daniel documented the disturbed monument locations. He photographed the excavation, recorded coordinates, marked reference points. Then he prepared a field report. I asked him one question. Could those markers have been mistaken for random scrap? He looked at the bent iron pin. No. Why not? Because somebody flagged them. That mattered. Before construction resumed, bright survey ribbon had been placed beside the monuments. The contractor had photographs showing their locations. Mark had already warned Cynthia in writing that the monuments appeared consistent with the recorded survey. Nobody had accidentally driven over something hidden underground. They had cleared objects they knew were there. I went home and organized the file. Folder 1 contained ownership records, the deed, legal description, recorded plat, historical survey references. Folder 2 contained notice, my email, certified letter, delivery confirmation, Mark's recommendation to stop work. Folder 3 contained the site, before photographs. After photographs, Daniel's field notes, equipment numbers, timestamps, measurements. I had spent most of my working life around civil projects, road widening, drainage improvements, utility corridors, subdivision layouts. The disputes changed. The paperwork did not. If something ever reached a hearing, memory was weak. Dates were better. Documents were better than dates. And photographs with measurements were better than opinions. There was another reason I cared about that boundary. My grandfather bought the original property when this side of the county was mostly open ground. My father grew up there. So did I. When I was 12, I once asked my father why he checked the old stones along the property line after heavy storms. He said, "A fence tells people where you want the line to be. A survey tells them where it is." He never treated those markers like decorations. Neither did I. By late afternoon, Daniel sent me his preliminary report. 32 pages. Photographs. Coordinates. Reference points. His conclusion was short. The existing evidence supported the recorded boundary. The HOA's construction activity extended beyond that boundary. Multiple monuments had been disturbed, and further work should stop until the encroachment was resolved. At 5:07 in the afternoon, I forwarded the report to Cynthia, every board member, Mark, and the HOA attorney. Nobody could claim they had not received it. At 5:42, the attorney responded. They were reviewing the alleged encroachment and reserving all rights regarding the approved improvement project. Lawyer language. They had a problem. But the next morning, Mark called. His voice was lower than usual. Jack, they are ordering concrete. For the disputed section? Yes. When? Friday morning. I asked whether Cynthia had seen Daniel's report. She has. And she still wants to pour? Another pause. Yes. I wrote down the time of the call. Then I added one more line to the file. Notice confirmed. Work continuing anyway. At that point, I stopped wondering whether Cynthia would back down. The only question was how expensive she planned to make this. Thursday morning, I brought in 2 more professionals, a civil engineer and a restoration contractor. Neither one cared about HOA politics. I asked them a simple question. What does it cost to put this property back the way it was before they crossed the line? They spent almost 4 hours on site. The answer was not the price of 2 iron pins and a stone. The problem was everything the excavator had done around them. Nearly 1,900 square feet had been stripped and regraded. Part of the original drainage swale had been flattened. Compacted aggregate had been pushed across the boundary. Shrubs had been removed. And if the HOA poured concrete over the disputed area, restoration would become more complicated. The estimate came back itemized. Survey reconstruction and monument work, $8,460. Excavation and removal of unauthorized base material, $14,800. Drainage reconstruction, $11,750. Soil replacement and grading correction, $13,400. Landscape restoration, $9,650. Engineering, testing, and site supervision, $6,800. Total projected damage and restoration cost, $74,860. I rounded it to $75,000 in my notes. At 2:16 that afternoon, my attorney sent the package to the HOA. Survey report, photographs, certified notice, restoration estimate, formal demand to stop all work inside my boundary. Their attorney responded before dinner, not with an apology. With an offer, $20,000. In exchange, I would sign a permanent easement allowing the pool deck to remain where they had put it. I read the proposal twice. They were not offering $20,000 to repair the damage. They were offering $20,000 to convert their trespass into a permanent right. I declined. My response was one sentence: restore the boundary and remove all construction from my property. At 7:03 that evening, Cynthia emailed the board. I was not copied. I saw the message later. She called me a disgruntled adjoining owner and described the 11-foot encroachment as a minor boundary discrepancy. Then she wrote, "The project should proceed according to the approved schedule." Friday morning, I woke at 6:11. The first concrete truck arrived at 6:47. At 7:05, the pump unfolded its boom over the pool fence. Mark called me from the site. They are pouring the disputed section first. How many yards? 28 on the first order. Did Cynthia authorize it? She signed the release herself. I wrote down the time. Then I walked to the edge of my property and watched them pour. By 9:30, wet concrete-covered ground Daniel had already told them was mine. Cynthia stood behind the construction fence with both hands on her hips. She thought the concrete made her position stronger. In construction, there is a name for thinking like that: sunk cost. Pouring more money onto somebody else's land does not change who owns it. It only makes removal more expensive. By Monday, the concrete had cured enough for the crew to begin framing the cabanas. The HOA grand reopening was 12 days away. Invitations had already gone out to all 137 homeowners. A catering contract had been signed. A photographer was booked. Cynthia had spent 6 months telling residents this would be the association's largest improvement project in 20 years. Walking away now meant explaining why part of that $1.2 million project had been built on property the HOA did not own. Cynthia chose a different strategy. Finish it first. Argue later. At 10:12 Monday morning, a framing crew started assembling the first cabana. 6 support posts were inside my parcel. I photographed every one. At 11:03, 24 pallets of stone veneer arrived. At 1:27, electricians began trenching for lighting. I logged that, too. Every additional hour of work created another timestamp, another invoice. Another person who could answer one question later. Who told you to keep going? That afternoon, Mark called again. I am done with this after Friday, he said. What happened? She wants the remaining work accelerated. Cynthia? Yes. He lowered his voice. The attorney told them there is an active boundary dispute. She said the board has an event scheduled and she wants the site substantially complete before anyone can interfere. Did she put that in writing? Some of it. That got my attention. There are emails. Yes. I did not ask him to send me anything he was not authorized to release. I said one thing. Preserve them. I already have. The next evening, the HOA held its regular board meeting. I attended. Not because I expected Cynthia to change her mind. I wanted to hear how she described the dispute in front of the homeowners. She stood beside a rendering of the finished pool complex. The project remains on schedule. A homeowner raised his hand. What about the property line issue? Cynthia did not hesitate. There is no meaningful property line issue. We have an adjoining owner attempting to leverage a minor discrepancy for financial gain. I said nothing. Then a board member asked, has the contractor recommended stopping work? Cynthia looked directly at him. No. That answer was clean, confident, and false. I knew because I already had Mark's original recommendation. What I did not know was that his warning had been more detailed than the version I had. 3 days later, during document exchange, my attorney received 186 pages of HOA emails and contractor correspondence. Most of it was routine. Invoices, scheduling, material deliveries, change orders. Then, on page 143, there was an email thread dated the day before the monuments were bulldozed. The subject line read, Boundary Monuments. Request to stop work. My attorney called at 7:18 that evening. Jack, come to the office tomorrow morning. Why? He paused. Because Cynthia did not just know there was a boundary dispute. She gave the order. At 8:05 the next morning, page 143 was lying on the desk between us. The thread began at 3:46 in the afternoon, the day before the monuments were removed. Mark had written to Cynthia, the project architect, and 2 board members. His message was precise. Field crew had located existing iron and stone monuments. I had provided a recorded survey showing the proposed improvements crossing the boundary. The monuments appeared consistent with that survey. His recommendation was to suspend grading until a licensed surveyor verified ownership. No emotion. No accusation. Just a construction professional documenting a problem. 11 minutes later, The project architect replied. Agree. Do not disturb monuments until boundary verification is complete. Then Cynthia answered. 4:12, in the afternoon, 26 minutes after the warning. Her response was 3 sentences. The board has already approved the layout. The adjoining owner does not have authority over HOA construction. And then the sentence that changed the case. Proceed as planned. Remove anything interfering with the approved layout. I read it twice. The next morning, at 8:26, the excavator had begun removing exactly what she had been warned not to disturb. The timestamps lined up. The warning, her instruction, the machine activity, my photographs, Daniel's survey, the bent iron pin, the displaced stone. The entire sequence fit inside 17 hours. Then my attorney showed me another email Cynthia sent after the work was completed. Construction obstacles along the east side have been cleared, and the schedule is back on track. Obstacles. That was what she called the monuments. I asked one question. What does this do to the $75,000 claim? It changes the argument. How? Until now, they could say negligence, bad layout, bad communication. Contractor error. He tapped the email. This makes that harder. Then he opened a state property damage statute on his laptop. He explained that certain knowing or wrongful damage to another person's property could expose the responsible party to multiplied damages. How much? Potentially 3 times actual damages. I did the arithmetic. 75,000 times 3. $225,000. But the multiplication was not the important part. Intent was. For 2 weeks, Cynthia had called this a minor discrepancy. She told the board the contractor never recommended stopping. She told homeowners I was trying to leverage the HOA for money. Now we had her written order, and underneath it were 3 separate warnings. My certified notice, the contractor's warning, the architect's warning, all before the excavator moved the first monument. My attorney printed the thread and placed it behind Daniel's survey report. Do not discuss this at the next board meeting. I was not planning to. Good. What happens now? He closed the folder. Now we let their attorney explain it. 2 weeks later, Cynthia walked into the hearing, still calling the entire thing a misunderstanding. She had no idea page 143 was already marked as an exhibit. The hearing started at 9:03 on a Thursday morning. Cynthia arrived with the HOA attorney and 2 board members. She had the same expression she had worn beside the excavator. Calm, certain, like the only remaining problem was getting someone in authority to agree with her. The HOA attorney went first. He called the incident an unfortunate construction dispute. He said the property line had been unclear. He said the association relied on approved architectural plans. He described the monument damage as incidental to a project completed in good faith. For 12 minutes, everything was a mistake, a discrepancy, a misunderstanding. Then my attorney stood. He did not begin with Cynthia's email. He started with the boundary, the recorded plat, my survey, Daniel's independent survey report. 2 surveys, same line, same measurements, same conclusion. The HOA construction crossed onto my property by nearly 11 feet. Their attorney tried to argue that the architectural drawings showed something different. Daniel answered with 1 sentence. Architectural drawings do not convey land. Then came my certified letter, delivered before the monuments were removed. The delivery confirmation, Mark's recommendation to stop work. The HOA attorney changed direction. Now there had not been intentional disregard. There had simply been confusion over who had authority to stop construction. My attorney nodded. Then he picked up page 143. Exhibit 17. He handed a copy to Cynthia. "Ms. Bell, did you receive this email at 3:46 in the afternoon?" "Yes." "And the contractor recommended that grading stop." He raised a concern. "That was not my question." A pause. "Yes." "And the architect agreed?" "Yes." 26 minutes later, you responded. "Yes." "Would you read the final sentence?" Cynthia looked toward her attorney. He could not answer for her. She looked back at the page. "Proceed as planned. Remove anything interfering with the approved layout." Nobody spoke. My attorney let the silence remain for a few seconds. Then he displayed a photograph. The bent iron marker. Next photograph. The displaced stone. Next. The excavator tracks. All taken the following morning. Those were the things interfering with the layout? Cynthia shifted in her chair. "I was referring to construction obstacles, including monuments you had just been warned not to disturb. I relied on the board's approved plans." There it was again. Approved plans. As if approval could manufacture ownership. My attorney moved to the damages report. $74,860. Every line item documented. Survey reconstruction. Excavation. Drainage. Soil restoration. Engineering. Landscape repair. Then came the statute. The issue was not whether every construction mistake could be multiplied. It could not. The issue was whether the conduct shown in the record qualified under the property damage law being applied to the claim, and Cynthia's biggest problem was chronology. She received my notice. The contractor warned her. The architect warned her. She ordered the work to continue. The monuments were removed. Then, after Daniel's independent report arrived, she authorized concrete across the same disputed ground. Misunderstanding had become a difficult word to use. The final damages determination came later. The documented amount was accepted at roughly $75,000. The applicable multiplier took the figure to approximately $225,000. One of the board members behind Cynthia lowered his head. Cynthia stared straight ahead. My attorney closed the damages folder. I thought that would be the moment she finally understood the scale of the problem. It was not. Because when discussion turned to restoration, the HOA attorney asked whether monetary damages could settle the matter without disturbing the completed pool expansion. My answer was no. The land was not for sale. The easement was not for sale. And the concrete was still 11 feet on the wrong side of the line. For the first time that morning, Cynthia turned around and looked directly at me. That was when she realized the $225,000 was not buying her the pool deck. It was paying for the damage. The pool deck was a separate problem. 3 weeks later, at 7:15 on a Monday morning, another construction crew arrived at Lakeview Commons. Only this time, the machines were not there to build Cynthia's expansion. They were there to cut it apart. The first concrete saw started at 7:32 that morning. You could hear it from my kitchen. A steady mechanical whine. Then the crack of a section breaking free. I walked down to the property line with a cup of coffee. This time, nobody told me I was interfering with an HOA project. Daniel was already there. So was the restoration contractor. Bright survey flags marked the legal boundary every 20 feet. The difference was that everyone on the site now understood what those flags meant. The crew began at the eastern corner of the pool deck. 11 feet of finished concrete had to come out. Not patched. Not painted. Removed. The first cabana had 6 posts inside my parcel. All 6 were cut loose. The electrical trench was reopened. Stone veneer installed 3 weeks earlier was stacked onto pallets and hauled back across the line. By 9:15, the section Cynthia had insisted nobody would ever force them to remove was sitting in broken slabs inside 2 dump trailers. She arrived at 9:38. White Lexus, designer sunglasses, no clipboard. She stood outside the construction fence for nearly 5 minutes without speaking. Then one of the board members approached Daniel. "Can you show me exactly where the boundary runs?" Daniel pointed to the instrument. Then the flags. Then the recorded coordinates. He explained it in less than 30 seconds. Nobody argued. For weeks, Cynthia had treated the line like a matter of opinion. Once the consequences arrived, it became a measurement again. At 11:20, the survey crew began restoring the disturbed references. They documented what had happened, rebuilt the boundary positions from surviving control points, and completed the survey work required to re-establish the line. 2 bright witness posts went in beside the restored boundary. You could see them from the pool. That afternoon, a temporary sign appeared along the eastern edge. Private property. Boundary verified by survey. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. The $225,000 figure was already dramatic enough. But the money was only part of what happened next. The homeowners started asking for the emails. All of them. The contractor warning. The architect warning. My certified notice. Cynthia's response. The board meeting minutes where she had claimed nobody recommended stopping work. Once residents saw the timeline, the argument stopped being about 11 feet. It became a question of why their president had risked association money after multiple professionals told her to stop. At the next meeting, the room was full. I stayed in the back. I was not a member of the HOA. I had no vote. I did not need one. A homeowner named Robert Gaines stood with a copy of Exhibit 17. He read Cynthia's instruction aloud. Proceed as planned. Remove anything interfering with the approved layout. Then he asked one question. How much did that sentence cost us? Nobody gave him an exact number. They did not have to. The vote came 43 minutes later. Cynthia was removed as president. 2 additional board members resigned before the end of the month. The replacement board adopted a new construction policy. Independent boundary verification before HOA projects approached adjoining private property. Contractors could stop work immediately if ownership became disputed. Large project records had to be available to residents before final approval. I did not ask for any of that. I asked for one thing. Respect the line. By the end of summer, my drainage was restored. The soil was regraded. The landscaping was replaced. The pool reopened with a smaller deck. 4 cabanas became 3. Nobody's life was ruined because the HOA lost 11 feet of concrete. The residents still had their pool. I still had my land. And the boundary was exactly where it had been before Cynthia decided a clipboard carried more authority than a recorded survey. A few weeks later, I walked the eastern edge of the property. The new witness posts were clean and bright. Beside one of them, partly hidden under the grass, was the old iron marker the excavator had bent. I kept it. Not because it was valuable. It was not. Not because it was worth $75,000. And certainly not because it was worth $225,000. I kept it because it reminded me of something Cynthia learned the expensive way. Property rights are usually represented by very small things. A line on a plat, a signature on a deed, a coordinate, an iron pin in the dirt. They only look insignificant until someone decides they can ignore them. Those survey markers were never worth $225,000. Ignoring what they represented was.